Your life has been extremely rich in so many different ways, but I know that it really also kind of came to light when you were a very young girl and you traveled with your parents and you got to see everything he did. Were you aware of how important your father was and what he was doing when you were a young woman?
You know, I think starting out very, very early, my parents, both of them, they were very smart. They said, look, everything that you'll see happening around us and to us, it has to do with your father's career, with his work, and it's got nothing to do with you. So don't go thinking, you know, whatever. But it was wonderful because my father, he really loved people. You know, he enjoyed the interaction. You know, he wasn't thrilled if someone came up with a telephoto lens if he's eating spaghetti and it's falling out of his mouth. Yeah. But he really respected journalists, and he respected photographers, and he respected this was their work, and you know they had their job to do. And so wherever we traveled, either in the States or abroad, he was always very gracious, very welcoming to people, and I would say they hovered around more and they clustered around more in Europe more than here. You know, Beverly Hills, everyone sort of let you alone. They just
that was such an era of filmmaking that it's incomparable and has never been repeated. I mean, just the power of your father's career. What was he for 25 years? He was, you know, listed as the leading man. I mean, there is such a legacy here that is incomparable in so many different ways. I mean, the impact of your father when he was a film star.
Well, the impact, and obviously I've learned more and more the older I've gotten, and the more history and time has established, I think, his position in many different areas. I was never allowed to see him in a movie until it was my 7th birthday, and I had a birthday party at home with some friends. We didn't have a projection room. We just had a little 16 millimeter, you know, machine, projection machine, and my father ran it. And the first movie I was allowed to see was The Plainsman. Oh. And everything was fine until there was a gruesome scene where he was being tortured by the bad guys, and he was hung up over a campfire and being lowered into the flames. And I thought, oh my God, you know, that was, And then I turned around and I looked behind me, and there was Papa standing behind the projection machine, and he winked and waved at me. And that was sort of, okay, fantasy, reality. And that sort of made my life, I guess, growing up with a movie star of his size, it sort of put it all into perspective. And it was wonderful. It was obviously, it always made me happy to see how people would cluster around him. And you know, I think it probably irritated him when they would be like 3 generations lined up, and then they send a little kid up and says, may I have your autograph? And he said, you mean your mother and your grandmother want my autograph, don't you? Yeah.
Right. He never wanted to be an actor to begin with. I mean,
no, and you know, he went to Grinnell College, and he tried out for the drama club, and they rejected him. And he went back to visit the school many years later, and they sent out a big committee and greeted him at the airplane, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Cooper, you know, we're so embarrassed, you know, that you didn't make the drama school." And he said, "No, you were right the first time." You know, that was how he was.
Fascinating trajectory from artist to extra to star, and also understanding his own value. You know, turning down contracts that were not appropriate, or turning down contracts at the time that were not enough to really be what he should earn in that. So a lot of things happening in that time. Did you ever have a chance to just sort of talk to him about the trajectory of artist to extra to actor?
No, I didn't. I don't think he analyzed his life in that in a sequential way. It was kind of a non-dualistic overall picture. I mean, he was always an artist. He was always sketching and drawing when he was up in Montana. When he broke his hip in an accident, he had to sit while it mended. He was very close to the Native American children and their parents, their elders, I should say. And they taught him patience. They taught him a lot about studying animals. And he was very observant, and I think observant as a graphic artist translated into being observant as an actor, being able to react, not just so caught up in your own part, in your own dialogue, that he really was able to interact with his whoever was playing opposite him, and he always felt, you know, that very often there were too many words, that you ought to be able to express a lot with your eyes, and that should really convey something going on back here, not just, you know, spouting words.
Well, you two have a lot in common in the fact that you went to Chouinard. So
Yeah.
you were an artist as well. So
Yeah.
did you ever share art stories together, or did you look at his work? And
Oh yeah. I saw. Well, in fact, I think you have it on exhibition here. I found in his old school books, which I have, he did a term paper on the history of Yellowstone Park, and it is illustrated. So I believe in this exhibition here at USC, there is that term paper with wonderful drawings of not only the mountains and the trees, but the waterfalls and Indians in canoes and flying eagles, you know, because there's sort of all. He loved nature. He really absorbed everything. When I was growing up, we would go to the beach and we'd have a sketchbook. He'd have a sketchbook with him, and he'd say, "Let's analyze how a bird flies."
oh,
And so he would make sketches, and you know, we look at the seagulls, and they're either if they were soaring or taking off or whatever, and then he would draw the wings and explain to me exactly which wings do what with the bird's feather to give it lift, or you know details like that.
well, you've devoted an enormous amount of, you know, your passion and love and energy towards maintaining this legacy of this man that you know and love so dearly. Why do you think it's important that his legacy is continued and his legacy is shared for generations that may not have actually recognized, you know, even the film High Noon, which of course was such a pivotal film, or any of the films that we're surrounded by the posters of right now? I mean, what is it that you see that is valuable for something that should last for a very long time?
Well, I think probably the answer to that is best summed up in something that he said himself when he was asked, "What makes you choose the roles that you play?" And he very simply said, "I want to try to portray the best a man can be." And that whether it was a real life hero like Alvin York or Lou Gehrig, prior to the Yankees, it was a later film called The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell, who was a true hero in his own field, and or then the fictional characters. That was always the goal behind what made him do what he did. And one of his last films was The Hanging Tree with Maria Schell. I think it was her first American film. And it was very much atypical because in the beginning with the character's name, Joe Frail.
Oh, yeah.
He was a doctor who had a dark past, and he escapes to the Montana and the gold rush days of the Old West. And he saves Maria Schill's life, but it's very violent in many ways. But sort of this mixture of anger and remorse and strength, and again, working through his problems and coming out the best is very, very significant.
And these roles had an impact on his life too. I know that he was a little hesitant to portray, Gehrig, but he learned and absorbed and a beautiful performance that was incredibly important and moving. And then when he toured to soldiers overseas, that he drew upon that.
Well, he drew upon that, and he was very, very nervous and upset about, what am I going to do on a USO tour? I'm not Bob Hope. I don't tell jokes. I'm not Betty Grable. I don't look sexy, and what can I give the guys? And one of the generals said to him, "Coop, the guys want to hear the Lou Gehrig speech." And there's a wonderful photograph. I don't know if you have it in this exhibition or not, but it's a picture of him sitting under a tent in the pouring rain, and he's scribbling on a piece of paper, trying to write down, to remember exactly what the words exactly were. And then there's a beautiful photograph of him standing on the stage, delivering the speech to 1,000 men and women who, and who knows which of those 1,000 soldiers were going to come back alive the next week. So it was a very, very, very powerful moment. The other character that he felt really intimidated by was portraying Alvin York.
Oh, yes.
And he really tried not to do it. But when the word came down that apparently Alvin York said,
"No one but him."
No one but Gary Cooper. He went and he met with Alvin York, and they got along. And I think there's actually the uniform my father wore.
Well, speaking
in that
of
film.
Things, I mean, we're surrounded by remarkable ephemera from an incredible career, posters and some of the highlights. I mean, you've kept these things, or you've been aware of where they are.
I kept some of them. I mean, when my mother and I moved back to New York, from a big house to a New York apartment, there was things that she got rid of that, she kicked herself around the block many times subsequently. But yes, I managed to keep my husband's a concert pianist, and between two pianos in our living room and my father's some of his memorabilia, it's a very full New York apartment.
Right.
So, but I was very excited that the artifacts would find a wonderful, safe home that would respect it too. I just didn't want things to be flying all over an auction.
Sure.
All around the world, and I think it's important.
Well, some of them have found some pretty exceptional homes. I mean, we have, the Autry Museum has some of his costumes.
Yes, I think that's from the Hanging Tree.
Okay.
I believe the boots and the hat. I think.
Right.
And then the saddle is Tom Hanks's, which just delights me no end, because I.
Do you know if he's ridden with it, I should say?
I think he has a little bit.
Good.
It's a specially built saddle. Actually, it was made in Australia. Because it has this unusually high cantered seat, because my father's old hip injury,
right,
back when he was a teenager, it was very, very hard for him to sit. It was hard for him to sit a horse that had a very wide back. It was really painful. But that's how he learned to ride so well, too.
Yeah, he had a very high gait.
We have a high gait, and to protect his body from pain. He learned how to sit the horse, just to stick it like.
You've mentioned earlier about Montana, growing up and loving the environment and the people who lived in the environment, and you've taken that even a step further in order to create a foundation that supports Indigenous peoples. How did you come to that decision?
Well, I kind of
Filmmakers,
felt I
say.
had no other way to go, because I know, and from lots of conversations at home, how deeply, deeply disturbed my father always was at how our country treated the American Indian. Just really, I mean, he was a man slow to anger, and he was really upset by what our government did my mother and I went to see the movie Little Big Man. Do you remember? It was
Sure,
Dustin
Hoffman.
And this very dramatic scene where Dustin Hoffman is sneaking up to the tent where General Custer is signing the death warrant for the Indians at Little Bighorn. And the camera comes in, and the candlelight on Custer is sort of enveloped in a halo of light. And my mother, in this stage whisper, you could have heard all over the balcony, she said, "Gary always said Custer was a son of a bitch." Don't do that, quiet. But that was true. So, so, very, very often when I'd go into my father's room, if he was reading, he would say he was going in to study the script for the next day, but in fact he was reading a book on American Indians.
Oh, interesting.
And history and all that. So I just felt, how he loved their culture, their oral tradition, which was so extraordinary. Their love of nature, their care for the country, for the environment. We must not foul our own nest was one of, I think Chief Seattle made that statement. So I just thought that, for Native Americans and Indigenous people also, to be able to get an education at an institution like this, where all their creative talents can be drawn on, be it writing, storytelling, imagination, directing. I know one of the young students I met via Zoom a few months ago. She's designing video games.
Oh.
But it's with the culture, the heritage in their DNA is just sort of comes out in so many different ways, and I just thought this would be the most appropriate opportunity, honoring my father, to be able to give an underserved group of young people a chance to really shine.
Remarkable opportunities in every direction. I did ask you about why we should consider your father, and you mentioned, the ideals of being a good man. And then I'm curious, what about you? What do you want people to learn from and resonate with from not only this exhibit, but just getting to know Gehrig Cooper again? Because, it's a fast-paced world. People are, watching things in a different way. But what do you hope the awareness will do?
Well, I hope the awareness would be. Well, I think that poster, in a way, speaks for itself, or it speaks to your question. I mean, this was a solidarity poster that was created for the citizens of Poland to hang in every polling place when they had their first democratic election. My husband and I had the good fortune to meet Tomasz, the artist, who designed it. And, what does that symbol stand for? He's carrying a ballot instead of a gun. And I think something like five U.S. presidents have all, said that high noon was their ideal. And why? If you ask why, it's the story of a man with courage who stands up against the opposition. I think there's a very telling scene in High Noon, and it goes by so quickly. I expect most people maybe miss it. The sheriff is being hunted down by the 5 bad guys,
Sure.
led by Frank Miller. And he's one man alone because nobody else stands up for him. And the marshal has a chance. He's got the draw on Miller, but Miller's back is to him. Miller doesn't see him. And the marshal calls out to Frank Miller. And Miller spins around, turns, and then my father's a faster draw than he is, and he kills him. But he doesn't shoot the man in the back.
There's a nuance
What is-
there
what- I mean,
that really
And
requires a thought. Yes.
It's a big nuance.
Right.
During the making of High Noon, Carl Foreman, who was the wonderful writer of the script, he was called out by the Hollywood blacklist, and he had to leave the country because there was shameful behavior. Anyway, Stanley Kramer, they were in the middle of shooting, and Kramer called my father into his office and said, Gary, Carl Foreman's off the picture. You know, this whole communist thing, this is too disrupting, and, you know, it jeopardizes whatever. Foreman's off the picture. And my father got up from the chair and said, if Foreman's off the picture, Cooper's off the picture. And he walked out the door. So what's the takeaway about who Gary Cooper was, what he was like, what image I would hope people take to heart about moral behavior in the real sense of
Right.
morality to your fellow human being, and courage. I mean, you know, sure, in the movie he could have kept on riding off with his bride into the sunset, but
Right.
but he came back because the townspeople
Needed him.
were vulnerable and needing him.
Well, and to your point about the McCarthy hearings, you know, your father was called in and never named a name.
Never named a name.
And, you know, that was an act of courage for an actor at that time because careers were being destroyed in different ways, but not in a bombastic way. I think that's one of the things that
He was
I
very
really
funny.
admire with your
was-
father
he was
is
so-
that
He was very funny
yeah,
in that sequence. If you remember, I think his final line, and they wanted to get him the heck off the stage and off the microphone. They said, "Have you ever heard anyone say anything that was communistic?" And he sort of chewed his lip and pulled his ear and did some business. And he said, I have heard a few people say we might have a more efficient government without a Congress. And the whole room broke up in laughter. And they dismissed him.
I don't know if I knew that. That's really, really funny.
Yeah, play the newsreel back if you. I think it's on YouTube, actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you'll love it.
Okay.
You'll get a kick out of it.
What prompted the choice of the USC School of Cinematic Arts for all of this?
Well, I investigated possible other places to place my father's archives, and when I came here, something just rang a bell that said yes. You know, it was the creativity, the dynamics, the opportunity to grow at the leading edge of the industry and at the leading edge of technology. I think the School of Cinematic Arts, for me, just exudes something that's so precious as a gift to young people to open them up to being creative. I mean, I had the benefit of going to Chouinard Art Institute,
Which is now Cal Arts.
which is now Cal Arts. And there was such a sense of love and creativity and love of creativity. It wasn't just a school, and it wasn't just someplace to get an art degree, and the art that they were producing was really creative. It wasn't following. I mean, it was disciplined, very much so. But they also had offered the opportunity of really saturation in painting, and you did your academics. You got up earlier. You got here earlier in the morning. You worked during the lunch hour, and you stayed later to do your academic classes.
And Chenard was run by a woman,
Chenard,
which is a remarkable thing.
Yeah, someone should do a story on her.
She changed so much. I mean, if you think that's all Disney, that's where that all came from.
Yeah.
So here we are, and I did ask, and before we were, because we are in a school environment, so we're the benefit of,
Benefits of young voices. That's
voices
wonderful.
floating in
wonderful.
on occasion. But is there something in here that you just cannot get enough of, that you love seeing again and again and again?
Well, as you may know, we just arrived when when I sat down. So this is the only area that I've seen so far.
And it must be delightful.
But it's thrilling. It really is. I mean, to know, number one, that the archives will be protected in perpetuity, and I think, for me, it's the difference between reading an email from someone and reading a handwritten letter from the same person. There's something tangible and intangible about the real thing, and I think, I mean, it excites me to see my father's saddle.
All right, so I'm going to have to let you go, but I do want to know, would your dad be proud of you?
I hope so. I hope so. You asked a question, did we share a lot of sort of conversations or something in painting, in art? And one day I was given an assignment at Chenard to paint a replica of a masterpiece. Well, my family had a very small but a very lovely fine art collection, and they had a beautiful little Renoir, the head of a girl wearing a pink feather hat. So I thought, oh well, this is snap. I've got it right at home. So I'm working on this assignment for school, and I'm copying the Renoir, and I've been working for several days, and my father came in from the studio one day, and he walked by my room, and he saw me laboring away. And he looked in, and he looked at the painting, and he looked at the real painting, and he looked at mine, and he only said one thing. He said, "Maria, why does she have a green mustache?" I had not mastered the art of underpainting yet. And that was his one. It was one bit of very helpful criticism. I said, back to the drawing board.
Aw, that's lovely.
But
thank you for doing this. Thank you for spending this time.
My pleasure, really.
Thank you for
very much so.
supporting young filmmakers, and thank you for making sure that your father's story continues to be told.
Well, I hope it is. I hope it continues to be told, and I hope he continues to be an inspiration to people.